in like civil case, it's like somebody did some wrongdoing against someone else, and then they're trying to be like, oh, this person owes me money or whatever.
Good, that's correct. So we are going to talk now about a criminal case. So that means that an individual is accused of breaking a law. Correct?
Yeah.
And do you agree with me that he either did it or didn't do it? And we just say that? Okay? So, a given person is either guilty or innocent. Is that true? Well, let me just posit that. Okay? A person is either guilty or innocent of this crime. But do the people making the decision know whether he's guilty or innocent? No. Right? Let's say the members of a jury don't know if a person is guilty or innocent. And in fact, if they did know, they would be ineligible to be on the jury. Isn't that true? Right? To be on a jury, you have to have no knowledge of the case. Correct? Then there's like evidence, which is one of the things I want to return to when we return to this topic. Okay? But there's evidence, and at the end of the evidence, then the jury has to make a decision. Do they not? Yes? And Emma asks, what is the decision that they have to make? What is she doing? So the evidence has been presented in a case, and then what does the jury have to decide? Carmela, help her.
Guilty or not?
Okay. Is that true? Reethi, is that right, what she just said?
What? Guilty?
The jury decides whether you're guilty or not guilty, or do they decide whether you're guilty or innocent?
I think it's not guilty.
Okay, why? You're right, why?
Well, I mean, they're deciding based on the evidence that they have, so they can't.
You're misunderstanding my question. Why isn't it find him guilty or find him innocent? Because isn't this a double negative? The person's either guilty or innocent. So why is it that the jury isn't deciding whether they're guilty or innocent? Yeah.
Because you could be like not guilty but not innocent, I guess.
No. I've posited that they either did this or they didn't. They killed the person or they didn't. Yes. Well, you could, I guess, prove innocence, but we don't ask anybody to prove innocence, right?
Guilty.
Go ahead.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Say again?
It's like innocent until proven guilty.
Right. Okay, so this is good for your AP test. This is our bedrock of our legal system. It doesn't need to be this way. It is this way here. Is that somebody is innocent until they're proven guilty. So we assume what is true.
Innocence.
So we assume this is true. That sounds like a what?
No hypothesis.
Isn't this a null hypothesis?
Aw.
And guilt is a what?
Alternative
hypothesis. Isn't that true? And then we have the evidence. Like in court, it would be whatever, testimony or physical evidence or stuff like that. In statistics, what's the evidence that's provided? Right? The statistic is the evidence. Right.
That's a trick question.
The statistic is the evidence. Right? Innocent is 25%. Guilty is more than 25%. The purpose of a court case is to figure out if you're guilty, right? The purpose of a statistical test is to figure out, detect we use, whether the P differs from this null amount. We're trying to detect it. That's the point. If we find him guilty, what are we saying about the null hypothesis? If we find him guilty, what are we saying about the null hypothesis? Right? That it's wrong. We just said, okay, we think the null is wrong. So finding him guilty is doing what, Laura? is rejecting the null hypothesis. Finding him not guilty, is it accepting the null hypothesis? Do you see the logic in our language is exactly the same? Instead of finding him innocent, we are saying we don't have enough evidence to find him guilty. If we fail to reject a null hypothesis, we're not suggesting that the null is true. We're saying we haven't had enough evidence to find it false. Really, the logic is identical here, is it not? And I think this is a really good way of thinking about it. Okay? Now, there are 4 states here. 4 things that could happen. I'm just calling them A, B, C, D. Okay? So, Annie Z, which ones are like good for the cause of truth and justice here? A, B, C, and D. Do we all agree with that? I mean, this may not be good for the defendant, but for the cause of truth, right, this is good. The guilty person gets found guilty. Okay? And then this is good, because if he didn't do it, we would like to find him not guilty. Okay? Will we ever know which state we're in? Right, so we know which one, which row or which column? Which one do we know about? We know which row we're in, right? Because we know whether we are found guilty. Do we know which column we're in? Not really. Well, okay, but right, we don't know whether somebody is guilty or innocent. Right? We could have strong evidence. You don't know about that video. It could have been doctored with stuff over. Right? We don't know. Okay? These 2, though, are mistakes, aren't they? And these have a name. Okay? So if we reject a null hypothesis that is true, we call this a type 1 error. And then this one, guess what? It's called a what? Type 2 error. So type 1 error is finding an innocent person guilty. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
Yes. Right? We punish somebody who didn't do it. That seems to be a huge problem. Type 2 error is letting a guilty person go. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
Yes. He could go out and do it again. We haven't found the person who really did it. Right? Both of these are big problems. Let's define these in terms of statistics. So what's type 1? Brennan, what's type 1 in terms of statistics? Good. Okay. We're rejecting a true null hypothesis. Type 2 is what?
Accepting.
Go ahead.
Or accepting.
We never accept.
We are not rejecting.
What's our word? Failing to reject.
Failing to reject.
Say what?
An alternative hypothesis.
No. So he said this is rejecting a true null hypothesis, because if the null is true, we shouldn't reject it. So this is a type 1 error. If we're failing to reject, a what? What's true about the null hypothesis if we're here?
False.
It's false, right? So this is failing to reject a false null hypothesis. And then the third vocabulary is called power. And power is rejecting a false null hypothesis. Which square is that? Which square, A, B, C, or D? Do we agree A? This is power. What's the point of doing a trial? Why are we doing a trial? To what? To prove somebody's guilty. We're not having trials to exonerate people because we assume they're innocent. So if there's nothing in the trial, they're found innocent. We're not having the trial to find them innocent. That's not the point. The trial is to determine whether they're guilty. The power is the whole point of the trial. Likewise, in a statistical test, we are trying to assemble evidence to reject the null hypothesis. The extent that we can do that is called the power. The power is kind of the point of the whole thing. Now, let's think about a statistical test. And start putting in some numbers here, okay? So, here's a statistical test. What would you call this that I've just shaded right now? What is that? Why am I shading 5% over on the side? If I get a p hat out here, I'm going to reject the null hypothesis. I'm just telling you right now. If I get a p hat over here, I'm failing to reject the null. If I get a p hat over here, I'm obviously failing to reject, right? Because I'm only testing whether it's bigger. It's a one-tile test. So if I got something less, obviously that would just be a duh. In the middle, I have mu p hat equals p. What did you say? Okay, there's a significance level of 0.05, isn't that right? I seem to be setting up a situation here where alpha is 0.05. So if the probability gets lower than 0.05, I'm going to reject the null hypothesis. Let's say I do reject the null hypothesis. If the null was right, what I've just drawn up here is reality, is it not? And I've just committed a what? If the null is right, what have I just committed? Look at our definitions. A type what? Type 1 error. What's the probability of me doing that? What? No. What's the probability? Before I start now. P-value is after you're done. Before I start, what's the chance of me making a type 1 error there?
5%.
Isn't it 5%?
Yeah.
Aren't we really saying, now that I add this vocabulary to you, that alpha is the probability of a type 1 error before we start the test? Sometimes people talk about the p-value as the probability of a type 1 error. I don't think that's quite right, because then you're done already. You've either made a type 1 or you haven't. When I say alpha is 0.05, I am admitting, I am allowing this test to have a up to a 5% chance of making a type 1 error. That's not a lot, right? But it could be lower, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, can I eliminate type 1 error? Can I all but eliminate type 1 error? Could I make my significance level 0.000001?
Yeah.
I could, couldn't I? And now I have all